Looking at the pictures and videos of Epstein Island, to be honest, it's a bit hard to understand why so many people wanted to go there, and so many times. It looked a little Spartan to me, hardly the height of luxury, and nothing like what you'd get at a good resort in, well, Cuba, for example. But what you wouldn't get in Cuba is, well, the extracurricular attractions that Jeffrey Epstein was providing for his many powerful and rich guests. It looked, as I say, well, even a little sordid, and that would be the case even if you didn't suspect what had been going on there. There's a picture of a dentist's chair. Do I have to get down and dirty with you? It's a dentist's chair in a room which is covered with plastic masks and rubber human faces affixed to the walls. I don't even want to think about the kind of treatment that the patients in that dentist's chair got. But I do know that there's a very great likelihood that these patients were not there of their own volition, or were not even old enough to make a decision on their volition. Much more is promised tomorrow, and if it's good enough and interesting enough, of course, we'll bring it to you on Sunday. But if I had ever been to that island, which of course I have not and would not, I'd be worried about these pictures and videos, and in particular about the dump which the House Oversight Committee is planning on making tomorrow. But just as the idea that the Ukraine could defeat Russia in a war, just as the idea that the European Union could go on printing money at your expense to keep the war going when Trump has plainly, self-evidently lost all interest in its prosecution, well, the presence in Moscow of Witkoff, his special envoy, and Kushner, his own son-in-law, was surely a wake-up call for everyone. The Europeans gnashed their teeth and rended their garments and wailed awfully at the fact that they are entirely left out of this process. They project it onto Zelensky. They say there's no peace without Zelensky, but the ground is moving underneath Zelensky as we speak. Of course, the Americans are not uninvolved in making the earth move. The anti-corruption unit set up by the United States, backed by the United States, and moved by the United States, is set to issue indictments to no less than 77 members of parliament, all of them from Zelensky's parliamentary faction. Zelensky's chief of staff has already been forced to resign. There are documents, there are tape recordings, there are cash and paper trails, all of which lead to the chiseling little crook that I have been telling you was the thief of Kiev all through this stage of the conflict. These were called Putin talking points, but they are more correctly described now as United States talking points. It is the United States and its voice in England, the Daily Telegraph, who are leading the way in the uncovering of the corruption that they pretended did not exist all of this time. You can see the panic, of course, in Kiev. Apparently, a score, 20 Ukrainian politicians have just traveled to Moscow to try to make their own separate peace with the Russian government. Desertions at the front line are at an all-time high. Fully 25% of the entire armed forces, the entire order of battle of the Ukrainian armed forces has now deserted. And then, of course, there are a very large number, scores of thousands at the minimum, of people who have simply surrendered in the face of what is now an overwhelming military sweep that is casting all before it. Kupiansk, I talked to you about so many times over these last 4 years. I kept asking you if you were ready to sacrifice your son, your way of life, your standard of life, your liberties in your own country to decide which side of a line the city of Kupiansk would lie, when it had lain in 4 different countries in the last 100 years. Not many of you put your hand up to say that you were ready to make that sacrifice for Kupiansk. Well, for Kupiansk, at least you will no longer be asked to, because Kupiansk is this night in the hands of the Russian armed forces. Like Pokrovsk before it, like all these other big victories, cities, towns, villages and hamlets are now raising the Russian flag all over the front line, and it's a very big front line. In fact, there are virtually no parts of that front line where the Russians are not now advancing. It's only a matter of time. And it's been said by people who should know that Zelensky has already been told that he must now resign. The Telegraph and the United States propaganda indicates to me that the person who's been picked to take his place, at least as an interim until elections can be held, is the Ukrainian ambassador to London. London, as always, is up to its neck in everything that is happening in Ukraine. The poor bloody infantry of the Ukrainian army, sent untrained, poorly clad, poorly armed, into a front line in which they were eaten alive, sometimes within a week of arrival, sometimes even less, have been betrayed by Zelensky and his gang in Kiev completely. The betrayal is not Donald Trump's. The betrayal started with Joe Biden when he was the Vice President of the United States, continued when he was, or his Otto pen at least, was the President of the United States between 2020 and 2024. The betrayal is by the European governments that fooled the Ukrainian public into thinking that their coffers were bottomless, that their armories were limitless, and that they, if necessary, would be ready to come to the aid of the Ukraine. None of those things were true. The coffers of the European Union are not just empty, the police are in and opening the books. The biggest crisis ever faced by the European Union in 20 years is unfolding this day in Brussels. The anti-corruption squad of the Belgian police have arrested, taken into custody, some of the biggest names in European Union foreign affairs, European Union diplomacy over the last decades. They have been arrested because of an alleged fraud amounting to many, many millions of euros. Some of the most famous people that you may well remember, Mogherini, for example, of Italy and of Brussels. She's under arrest, and many others will follow her. This crisis brings to a head the cataclysmic course of events over the last 4 years at minimum inside the European Union. They promised more than they could deliver. They threatened to steal Russia's money to cover up the fact that they had no money left. Indeed, there's a great deal of suspicion. As our guest Martyanov said on Sunday, they may actually already have stolen it. Anyway, as Kushner and his party wandered around, I mean literally wandered around like tourists in Red Square and around the Bolshoi, it raised a number of questions. First of all, nobody, least of all the president, least of all a president that of a country that has been at war with Russia for the last 4 years, could have walked around in the center of Washington. They could not have walked around in the centre of London. They might have faced protests. They definitely would have faced muggers and criminals who would have assaulted and robbed them. The fact that Witkoff opened with Putin, hailing, as I did to you, and as Elon Musk's father did to you, hailing Moscow as the new Rome, used to be the third Rome, now it is Rome, is an indicator of how fast and far the tables have turned. I remember presenting a television show, Kalimahorra, right at the very beginning, when the first package of sanctions against Russia was presented. And I remember the exact words that I used. This will all turn out to be the most deadly boomerang ever thrown by anyone. And my God, have I been proven right? Have I been vindicated? The European economies are now in free fall. Germany's deindustrialization is proceeding at such a pace that this very week, the head of the German Employers Federation predicted that Germany was on the point of collapse. Christmas lights will not be lit in Germany this year. Such is the crisis of energy which the German government has volunteered for, indeed bludgeoned and browbeaten other European countries to follow suit. When Hungary doesn't want to do it, Hungary is bludgeoned, threatened, blackmailed. When Slovakia doesn't want to do it, they are treated exactly the same. So if the head of German industry says his country is on the point of collapse, my prediction is he's probably right. The political fortunes of the war leaders I've adumbrated to you so many times, but it's worth making the point again, that if you add public support for Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron and Herr Merz together, you will not remotely reach the number 50%. These are political pygmies, dwarfs, who are wandering around, in Macron's case, rather like Caligula, in Starmer's case, like a constipated sitcom character who barely fits in to the white tie that he squeezed himself into this week. To say that China was now a major threat to the United Kingdom, having left the European Union, declared war on Russia. He's not content. He wants to make an enemy of everybody. And at the Mansion House, where else, in his white tie and tails, this week it was China. These people have stolen your money. They stole your money and gave it to a thief, when they must have known that he was a thief. When the head of a presidential office is accused of a £100 billion theft, then what do you think the people higher up got? We already know the millions that third and fourth tier Ukrainian civil servants have been caught with in the boot of their Mercedes. Millions of euros. This is not the Great Train Robbery. This makes the Great Train Robbery look like Thomas the Tank Engine. This is the biggest theft ever recorded in human history. And your leaders either are too stupid to have known that it was going on, or much more likely, highly likely, as Theresa May would say, they knew all along and may even have been getting a piece of the action. So the skids are under Zelensky. The skids are under his parliamentary faction. Everyone is jockeying for power and jockeying for a place in the new post-war order. And some of them will get it, no doubt. There will be a transition. But until this agreement is made, the Russian armed forces will continue to advance. And the faster and farther they advance, the more easy it is to advance still faster and farther. And all these people who told you all these lies, all these journalists, all these broadcasters, all these politicians, all these experts that told you so many lies, that Russia was losing, that Ukraine was winning, that you'd be barbecuing on the beach in Crimea the summer before last, they were all lying to you. And the only place that you got the truth was in places like this, that you found increasingly difficult to find, given the collusion and collaboration between big tech media giants and the governments that rule Western countries. The situation is dire, but not just for the reason you might think. It's dire because there will be no recovery. It isn't the case that if Trump declares an agreement with Putin next Tuesday that the war is over. The shooting war might be over. But as long as your leaders remain in power, in the chancelleries, in your capitals, they will try to continue the war by other means. What else can they do? They cannot openly admit defeat. They cannot openly admit that they've been lying. They cannot openly admit that you've been robbed. They cannot openly admit that the man they've hugged on the doorsteps of their presidential and prime ministerial residences so many times that his fatigues have become, well, fatiguing to the viewer in just about every country. They cannot admit to you that this little man that they called the new Churchill actually was just a corrupt, failing, incompetent crook. Because what would that tell you about their judgment and about their character? There's so much to discuss tonight, but the first guest this evening can do it much better than I. He is Colonel Douglas MacGregor. He is the real deal. Stay tuned. I'll be right back.